very happy to be here. I don't do much getting out of my little homestead, so it's nice to have such a lovely audience here to read to besides my chair in my office. So. I'm going to read a few poems from a couple of different collections, and I have some copies that I made for you. If you're interested, please see me after the reading. I brought copies of my children's book, as Joan said. I won't read that to you right now unless you want me to. But it's for the 3 to 6 year old group, and it's not a learn how to read book, but it's a to be read to book, if that helps. And 3 to 6 years, they're just old enough then that they're not chewing on books anymore. So think about that, right? Thanks, Joy, for the opening up, and Michael had to run. It started snowing. I don't want to alarm anybody, but I'll try to beat the snow with this reading, okay? This poem was inspired by getting into an argument with my wife. After you left, I stopped exercising and riding my bike. Instead, I drove to work every day. I stopped eating oatmeal. Only eggs and buttered toast for breakfast, hamburgers and French fries for lunch, and a strict liquid diet for dinner. I drank lots of coffee and beer, smoked cigarettes and cigars, went to bars, and flirted with women, and I admit, the scent of an unfamiliar perfume behind an ear tickled my nose. I didn't do laundry, make the bed, or open the curtains. The dishes stacked up. I didn't recycle, sweep the house, or even take out the garbage. I forgot to feed the dog on occasion. She now looks at me with drooping ears and licks at my feet. The cat hisses at me when I walk by and hasn't been around much. I hardly brushed my teeth or showered, stopped flossing altogether, and I stayed up late watching TV and eating chocolate ice cream. I took your advice after you left and really let myself go to hell. Thank you. A little levity. So my intent here is to have a little levity, and then by the end of the reading, I hope to stab you all in the heart. Dad's Last Punt. This and the previous poem come from this collection that I have called Freeway, and it is about learning how to be a responsible husband and father. Dad's Last Punt. So drunk, you had somebody drive you home from the office. I heard Mom say thank you and the sound of a car door shut. You stumbled into the backyard and grabbed that ball from me, spun it in your hands, feeling for the lace, fingers yellow from cigarettes, telling me to go long. Punting in full military dress isn't easy, especially when all hopped up. Your leg was in the air higher than a father's should go. You grimaced as your ass hit the ground, but got right back up. And Dad, boy, did that ball fly. It crested the roof of the house and caught daylight's last glimmer. Even the dog perked her ears. And there I was in the middle of the yard, looking up at the sky, waiting to cradle the ball as it hit my chest. Easy to love you. What do the pine boughs say? That's easy enough. They say I love you. What does the crunching gravel say? That's easy too. It says I love you too. In fact, the whole earth says I love you. We can put words into the mouths of gravel, yet we always turn around at the end of the road. Our headlights search the night, waving around long white carrots at the stars. A soldier says to his enemy, I love you with bullets. I care about you enough, he says, to end your great suffering. The dead enemy says, thank you, I love you too. But his family does not. Firing a gun is a long road full of blind corners and potholes. Wars come and go, soldiers live and die, and we keep making more of them. Every time we have sex, we open our legs and set them free. Right? When we put kids into the world, that is the risk. I'm going to tell a little story about this next poem. It is a poem that I wrote a long time ago. It's called Upon Watching a Reenactment of a Civil War Battle. And the story I want to tell is about 8 or 9 years ago. Somebody wrote me out of the blue and asked me if I would give him permission if he read this poem at a service. And I was so touched and moved, and I said, you could have read it and not told me, and I wouldn't have known, and it would have been great. And he said something that really stuck with me. He said, there's too much trespass in the world today. So I was just honored that I was asked, and I considered one of my greatest successes as a poet, right? What was really interesting about this particular thing that he was reading the poem for, his great-great, or maybe it was 3 great-uncles' remains had been recently discovered, and they were relocating the remains from where they found them to the family funeral plot in Connecticut. And he was going to read my poem at that event, and it was a full military service, 21 guns, taps, and everything. And the reason I know this is because the newspaper, his local newspaper, did a story on it, and there's a picture of him, and it says in the caption, reading a poem by Eric Wayne Dickey. Unfortunately, the poem is not as good as that story. No. Upon watching a reenactment of a Civil War battle, and this comes from an early collection I have here, and I brought some copies also. His pen moved across the page as it did over 150 years ago, and he spoke of dead ideas, preventing them from fully disappearing. Would he himself die by his own free will? Or when the freedom fighters come, would he run and hide in a dark closet with mirrors and reflecting the inside? Or was he the one that lay riddled with round bullets among the many bleeding men? If so, did he open his eyes one last time to see the peach blossoms of the orchard, the battleground, falling early from the many flying bullets, falling like snow over his body, his face, his eyes? Okay, a little more levity. About 10 years ago, I was in this real writing rut, and I challenged myself to write these poems, and what came out were prose poems that I call the Hardy Boy poems. So what I did is I used language and people and names and places of the Hardy Boys' Nancy Drew stories, right? And it was fun. I got to read a whole bunch of them again and relive my youth. But I wrote them with more kind of a modern context in them. So there's lots of, not lots, but there's poems about sex and racism, drug use, classicism, economics. So I'll read a few of these for you today. The Curse of the Crew Neck Sweater. And I have to say that I am embarrassed by these poems, okay? I wrote them for myself and I never intended to share them. And somehow a friend of mine saw one and just encouraged me to send them out, and I got them picked up by a publisher, and I'm so, forgive me, I'm embarrassed, okay? They're kind of juvenilia, but somehow funny to read, if that makes sense. Let's see here. The Curse of the Crew Neck Sweater. Callie gave Frank a sweater for Valentine's Day. Frank put it on right away and felt the tight knit cinch around his neck. He didn't want to offend, so he admired its cozy fit as he pulled out the collar of his shirt underneath. "Gee, thanks, Callie," Frank said with a glimmer of hope in his eyes. He became listless as the day grew on. The sweater restricted blood flow to his brain. He was daydreaming of how Callie would be when Joe snuck up from behind and tousled his hair, joking, "Hello, anybody in there?" Frank stood up and felt a stretch in his pocket. Joe gazed down at the bulge, gasping speechlessly. Frank blushed and picked up his notebook to hide his embarrassment. He bolted outside and down to the boathouse. Callie was there, sitting alone in the sleuth, staring out at the bay. Moored to the pier, the boat bobbed up and down excitedly. I'll read one more. The Axeman of Bayport. Summer was in full swing with Joe and Frank Hardy out of town. Bayport seemed frozen in time. Biff Hooper walked towards Prito's Pizzeria to see if Tony could slide him a slice. He saw Iola and Callie cut down the alley, and he decided to circle around to give them a spook, but he was the one who got a surprise. The girls were sharing a smoke with Belinda Conrad's brother, Brian. Biff decided to play it cool and simply walk up to them. "Hey guys, how's it going?" Without a word, Brian handed Biff a pack of Marlboros, and Biff fumbled one to his lips. Brian flicked his Zippo, and Biff pretended he knew how to smoke. Brian began shaking a can of red spray paint. The plastic ball inside clicked out a jazzy rhythm. Biff choked down a cough. The girls giggled. Just then, Police Chief Colleague rolled up in his patrol car, brakes squealing. Biff froze, his face pale. The girls began whispering. Brian sneered at the chief and without a flinch sprayed, "Bird lives," on the blue dumpster. Oh, you'll like this. So I was recently gifted a fully functional portable typewriter. And it's a Remington 333, and it's wonderful, and it's really loud, and my family has banished me to the garage when I use it. But it's so much fun typing poems on a typewriter because you can't correct the many mistakes that I made. And so this is one of those poems that came out. A few months ago, a friend of mine posted on Twitter saying how all poems should be about how we overthrow the government. Okay, so that's what this is about. All right. This is how. When I open my mouth, a river rushes out. Once polluted, the river has felt its fish returning. Squirrels run along the banks between oaks through blue and white crocus flowers sprung up in the leaf litter. This is how we overthrow the government. We let the leaves go unraked. We must forego raking the leaves. You know this is true. I drive the night along the river, sometimes right next to it. Other times the river swings wide across the valley where it crosses unnoticed under bridges, bare at the banks or skirted with trees into Mill City, Scio, and all points beyond. Okay, now comes the stabbing part. About 10 years ago, I lost my only brother. He was 42. He had a heart attack in the middle of the night. I talked to him on Sunday. He died on Tuesday, and it was kind of a fluke freak accident. And the way, what inspired me about this, if that's the right word, is I guess I was too stubborn to give my brother up fully, right? So I wrote poems to him, and I do that by writing to famous people named James, or to places named James, and I write to them as if they were my brother. And I oftentimes mix the characteristics of my brother with the characteristics of the subject, and it's a wonderful therapy. I recommend it. And I made a few of these, and I have a collection of about 8 of them. And what else was I going to say? That's good. Okay. James Brown. Sex appeal, stamina, hair, white teeth, confidence, you had it all. A collared shirt, a sharp belt, crisp denim jeans. But why no shoes in your casket? Only socks. You used to wear black hush puppies until they sloughed off your feet like brittle rags, holes in the soles. Shoes determine who lives, who dies. If only you'd had high-quality, white patent leather shoes to wear, you'd still be dancing today. With the right shoes, you could hit the splits in a standstill, in an instant, on the floor, like a death drop, seamless, overtaken by spirit as if God himself placed his finger on your forehead. Yes, that's it. If only you'd had better shoes, shoes to bind your feet, shoes to help you slide back up just in time to hit the microphone. Get up, get on up, stay on the scene, get on up, get up.